Suzanne Pilley was born in 1972 into her family, her mother Sylvia, her father Bob and sister Gail, and the family all resided in Edinburgh. Suzanne was always a happy-go-lucky kind of girl. She enjoyed swimming, running, cycling and most outdoor activities. The family were extremely close and they were constantly in contact with each other, even if they didn't see each other every day by phone call or text. They would often receive early morning texts from Suzanne while she was on her way to work. And at the time of this case, Suzanne was 38 years of age. She had her own apartment in the town and a job as a bookkeeper in the town centre. Suzanne had been in an on and off relationship with a man named David Gilroy. He was a former Royal Navy engineer, but now worked for the same company as Suzanne, and they'd lived together on and off on like a temporary basis. David Gilroy had begun a relationship with Suzanne back in spring 2009. He had even moved into her £90,000 top floor former council flat in Stenhouse, just a few streets away from her parents' home. The couple had previously met at work before embarking on a turbulent relationship, but the problem was, David was a married man. He would leave a multitude of messages and voicemails daily for Suzanne, who kind of felt in a trapped and somewhat controlled relationship. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, leaving Suzanne unhappy and constantly telling David it was over. However, the cycle would continue. But more recently, Suzanne had told David that it was over for good. She had ended the affair and he had gone back to his wife, Andrea, their family home in Silverknowes. But it appeared that David Gilroy had refused to accept that it was over, and Suzanne was concerned that David would confront her at work over the ending of their affair. He had a temper that Suzanne did not want to be any part of. He was domineering and also could be quite arrogant. And Suzanne had even felt that David had hacked into her email and internet dating records, thrown her belongings out of a kitchen window and hid her mobile phone. The problem was that the pair worked in the same building and often saw each other at work. This is how they met in the first place. But on the morning of the 4th of May 2010, Suzanne was making her way to the offices of Infrastructure Managers Limited in Thistle Street in Edinburgh. She worked there as a bookkeeper and she left her home in Whitsun Road in Edinburgh, and she was seen at 8:48 a.m. on security cameras as they showed her leaving the bus at Jenna's department store in Princess Street. As part of her routine, Suzanne would often call into the branch of Sainsbury's on St Andrew's Square during her walk to work. At 8:51, she was seen on CCTV leaving Sainsbury's, and other cameras caught her passing across St George Street, walking up North St David Street, before disappearing round the corner into Thistle Street at 8:55 a.m. There, she entered the premises of her employer's Infrastructure Managers Limited, but this was the last public sighting of Suzanne, and that day she failed to turn up for work. But she did turn up for work, right? She entered the building, as her parents were down as her next of kin, and Suzanne had been a no-show, no-call. The company contacted her parents to make sure she was okay. It was very unlike Suzanne not to at least call in. So on the afternoon of the 4th of May 2010, after finding out that their daughter was missing, and they couldn't get hold of her either, Suzanne was reported missing to Lothian and Borders Police by her parents, Robert and Sylvia. Their first task, however, was to check all available CCTV in an attempt to pin down the last movements of Suzanne. They shifted through hundreds of hours of footage, plotting her final journey that day to her Edinburgh City workplace. They could see Suzanne with a shoulder bag and bottle of mineral water as she boarded the number 2 bus near her home in Whitsun Road in the capital Stenhouse area at 8:20 a.m. The cameras tracked her all the way to work. The street CCTV showed her arriving at work and entering through the doors, but not leaving. On the 11th of May 2010, the police started a high-profile public appeal for information in this case, using large screens that were erected in the centre of Edinburgh, playing footage of Suzanne's last known whereabouts. And on the 18th of May, Suzanne's employers issued a statement saying that her disappearance was completely out of character. The police started to look into Suzanne's recent split from David. They requested Suzanne's phone records, as her phone was also missing. CCTV cameras on properties outside the work buildings showed David coming in and out of the basement garage the day that Suzanne disappeared. David quickly became a suspect in this case after police spoke to staff about him. He apparently arrived at work by bus that morning, but later made excuses to go home and collect his car. Later, he was caught on CCTV having just brought 4 air fresheners from a store, and police believe that David Gilroy lured Suzanne to the basement of the building and possibly killed her, suggesting that he may then have hid her body in a stairwell before later transferring it to the boot of his car. Phone records came back that David had bombarded Suzanne with tens of messages a day, but after that morning, he had not messaged her again, as if he knew she was not coming back. Specialist cadaver dogs were brought in to search the basement and garage of the works building, found traces of interest, but no DNA or forensics. That day after Suzanne had disappeared, before David had gone home, he'd used his work computer to arrange an appointment at a school, which would require him to drive 130 miles the next day. David then went home and acted naturally. Now, CCTV images even caught him attending a school concert and a restaurant that evening. The following day, police issued a statement saying that they were now treating the inquiry as a murder investigation. The building and all used rooms were thoroughly searched, and police spoke to family and colleagues to gather as much evidence as possible. But Suzanne was still not found. They wanted to know who she hung around with. They wanted to know more about her relationship with David and how her manner was in the lead up to her disappearance. On the 20th of May 2010, it was reported in the press that police had expanded their investigation into a 400 square mile area in Argyll. It was said that they were keen to trace the movements of a man in a silver vehicle driving on remote roads across Argyll and Bute on the afternoon of the 5th of May, and David owned a silver vehicle. The day following Suzanne's disappearance, David Gilroy had made this unplanned trip to the school where his firm had a maintenance contract. It was a route that David Gilroy knew well, as his company managed 5 school campuses in the area. He had also taken Suzanne there for days out. It was during the return journey that he received a call from detectives investigating Suzanne's disappearance, and he arrived back in Edinburgh that night and did admit to cops that he had had an affair with Suzanne. He said his wife knew all about it and insisted that the relationship with her was over. One officer, Sergeant Paul Granger, however, spotted scratches on David Gilroy's hands, and when he came to have them photographed the next day, he tried to cover them up with makeup, with concealer. After that moment, he was a prime suspect in his colleague's murder. Forensic examination of David Gilroy's silver Vauxhall Vectra found that the suspension, sump, springs and wheels had been badly damaged by travelling over rough ground. Vegetation and foliage trapped underneath in the wheel arches suggested that he'd visited a forest. Experienced police traffic investigators had never seen anything like it before, and David Gilroy was unable to offer any explanation. On the 23rd of June 2010, David Gilroy, a colleague and former boyfriend of Suzanne Pilley's, was detained by Lothian and Borders Police under Section 14 of the Criminal Procedure Act of Scotland 1995 in connection with her disappearance. Later that day, he was arrested and charged with murder. On the 24th of June 2010, David Gilroy appeared on petition in private at Edinburgh Sheriff's Court, charged with the murder of Suzanne and various other offences relating to her disappearance. He made no plea or declaration. A petition for bail was lodged and granted by the sheriff. On the 20th of February, the trial of David Gilroy began at the High Court of Justicery, sitting in court at Edinburgh Sheriff's Court. The indictment ran to 5 pages. The principal charges labelled that on the 4th of May 2010, David Gilroy killed Suzanne Pilley at the Offices Infrastructure Management Limited in Thistle Street, or elsewhere, by means known to the prosecutor as unknown. David Gilroy concealed Suzanne's corpse in the Thistle Street premises of Infrastructure Management Limited, transported it in the boot of a car, and various locations around Scotland, and thereafter disposed of it by means to the prosecutor as unknown. The jury of 8 men and 7 women began hearing evidence on the afternoon of the 20th of February 2012, 2 years after Suzanne had disappeared. The trial lasted 24 hours. One witness for the Crown was Suzanne's mother, Sylvia. She spoke of the fact that her daughter had had a turbulent on and off relationship with David, and that she'd previously cohabitated with him on a temporary basis. On the 23rd of February 2012, the Advocate Deputy led evidence from a Lothian and Borders police constable who told the court that they had enlisted the help of specially trained cadaver dogs from South Yorkshire Police to search the offices where David and Suzanne worked. The dogs were specifically trained to smell for blood and human remains. The court was told that the dogs, Springer Spaniels, had identified 3 areas of interest, 1 in the basement area of the offices and 2 in the boot of David Gilroy's silver Vauxhall Vectra. On the 24th of February 2012, the court heard from a forensic imagery expert, Jacqueline Butterwick, who had analysed footage on behalf of the police. She told the court that the CCTV footage of a person on Thistle Street bore enough similarities to other CCTV images of Suzanne taken that day for her to say that it was definitely Suzanne. She was 20 metres from the entrance to her work. On the 27th of February 2012, Andrea Gilroy, David Gilroy's wife, was cited as a witness by the Crown. As she entered the witness box, the trial judge, Lord Brackendale, explained that she had the right to not give evidence against her husband if she did not wish to. She declined to give evidence. On the 1st of March 2012, the Advocate Deputy led evidence from Sergeant Paul Granger and Lothian Borders Police. He spoke to the contents of an 11-hour interview with David Gilroy. Granger told the court that during the interview he noticed a scar on David's forehead under his hairline and that he had seen some sort of scratch on his chin. The court also heard that David had told police that on the evening of the 2nd of May 2010 he and Suzanne had decided to split up and then took part in a Buddhist-style religious ceremony, writing their feelings down on pieces of paper and burning them. On the 6th of March 2012, the court heard from a forensic scientist, Kirsty McTuck, who told the trial that she had conducted a search for DNA in Suzanne's workplace and in the car boot of David Gilroy's car. She confirmed that she had been unable to find any trace of Suzanne's DNA anywhere in the building or in the car, and she told the court that she had opened the boot to David's car and she'd noticed a fresh smell coming from inside. She told the Advocate Deputy that it would either have been an air freshener or a cleansing agent. The court later heard from a friend of Suzanne's, Gail Hawkins, who spoke to the fact that Suzanne had previously told people that she was worried that David Gilroy was hacking into her email account. David Prentice produced in court phone records showing that David Gilroy was in contact with Suzanne almost daily before her disappearance, but that the contact had stopped the day before she went missing. It was revealed that David would regularly text Suzanne more than 50 times a day. The last contact between their phones was on the 3rd of May. He then left 15 text messages and 1 voicemail. On the 7th of March 2012, a forensic pathologist, Nathaniel Carey, told the jury that David Gilroy had curved scratches on his hands, a cut to his forehead, bruises on his chest, and other scratches to his hands, wrists, and forearms. A series of photographs were produced to the court. He told the Advocate Deputy that the scratches could have been caused by another person's fingernails, possibly in a struggle that had happened around the time that Suzanne had gone missing. He also said that the injuries were consistent with what he had seen in previous cases involving strangulation, and that it was difficult to tell because the injuries had been covered up by makeup. In a cross-examination, Kerry confirmed that the scratches on David Gilroy's hands would have come from gardening activities also. And on the 8th of March 2012, the advocate deputy led evidence for a Lothian Borders police constable who told the court how they particularly traced a car journey David Gilroy made on the 5th of May using CCTV footage, and after analysing the footage, police reenacted the journey there and back several times. They found that David Gilroy had taken 2 hours longer than their average time each way. Furthermore, a comparison of fuel consumption suggested that 124 miles of David Gilroy's journey were unaccounted for. This concluded the evidence for the prosecution. On the 9th of March, the Crown withdrew a number of charges on the indictment relating to an assault, breach of peace, and a contravention Computer Misuse Act 1990. Charges 6 and 7 on the indictment, murder and attempting to defeat the ends of justice, respectively, remained. The defence case began on the morning of the 12th of March 2012 and lasted half a day. The court heard a number of witnesses who worked in the offices of Infrastructure Managers Limited, who spoke to the fact that they did not see anything out of the ordinary at the premises on Thistle Street on the 4th of May. David Gilroy declined to give evidence in his own defence. On the afternoon of the 12th of March 2012, Advocate Deputy Alex Prentice began addressing the jury. He told them that the Crown case was that David Gilroy had killed Suzanne Pilley in the basement of the office before hiding her body in a recess. David Gilroy had then brought his own car from home, put Suzanne's body in the boot, and the next day transported her to a lonely grave somewhere in Argyll. He pointed to a sudden interruption in Suzanne's life since she had vanished. In particular, he highlighted that she had made no contact with anyone since going missing. There had been no activity on her credit cards, she had not used her phone, and she had not made any arrangements for her pet fish or cat. It was also said that a lack of calls and texts from David to Suzanne after she went missing suggested that he knew she was already dead and that he had her phone. The advocate deputy also reminded the jury that David Gilroy had gone on a journey of no importance that day after the disappearance, instead of assisting the police with their inquiry. On the morning of the 13th of March 2012, Jack Davidson began summing up the case for the defence. He urged the ladies and gentlemen of the jury to assess the evidence. He said that it would be unsafe to convict David Gilroy of murder because the case of the Crown presented a circumstantial one. There was no body. The jury of 8 men and 7 women were sent out to consider their verdict. After 2.5 days of deliberations, on the 15th of March 2012, David Gilroy was found guilty by a majority verdict of murdering Suzanne Pilley and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. Suzanne's father, Rob, passed away in February 2019 without ever knowing where his daughter was buried. Unfortunately, Suzanne's dad didn't survive long enough for her to be found, and it's something that has been very important for Police Scotland to recover Suzanne. We're just hoping that a member of the public think maybe a bit of important information out there that will bring Suzanne back to her family. They have been so strong for all this time and put up with so much grief for the past 14 years. Obviously, that has caused a lot of stress. To be able to bring Suzanne home and give her a proper funeral will be a massive, massive thing for them. David Gilroy continued to maintain his innocence. In April 2012, not long after the court case, he lodged his intention to appeal against the conviction under Section 109. But the appeal was unanimously rejected by the Court of Criminal Appeal in Edinburgh on the 20th of December. His lawyers attempted to have his case reviewed by the UK Supreme Court, arguing police had acted illegally. However, their arguments were rejected by all 3 judges. In June 2017, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission closed their review of the case. Shortly after they refused his appeal, the Crown Office announced that evidence from the case would be removed from storage and destroyed. David Gilroy's family argued that this would make it difficult for him to overturn his conviction. As such, there is no legal basis for us to. However, spokesman for the COPFS defended the decision, stating that David Gilroy was convicted of murder and his appeal and application for the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission were all unsuccessful. Retain the productions relating to the case. The body of Suzanne has never been found, and her remains are believed to be buried in a forest somewhere in Argyll. Initially, David Gilroy was sent to HMP Edinburgh, but David Gilroy declined to be segregated from the general prison population. He was moved to HMP Shotts, following threats from fellow prisoners at HMP Edinburgh. It was later reported that David Gilroy had been attacked on his first day at HMP Shotts by fellow inmates and conveyed to hospital with a broken jaw after telling prisoners he would be released on appeal. Suzanne's family have gone through a very traumatic time of their lives, wondering where on earth their daughter is. To this day, they still have no idea where she disappeared to after turning up to work that day. They can only go on the information that they received from police and what they heard in court. They did gain some kind of justice, with David Gilroy being found guilty for her murder, but her father died without ever knowing where she was. What on earth does he have to gain by keeping this information to himself?